October 20th, 1862. After a week of marching, the Confederate Army of Mississippi finally returned to the confines of Knoxville, signaling the end of the highly anticipated invasion of Kentucky. Just like Lee's invasion in the East, the Confederates had high hopes that the fall invasions would swing the war solidly in their favor. But now, with both Lee and Bragg back on Southern soil, neither came close to achieving that goal. However, despite the similarities between the two campaigns, the difference between the two army commanders is how the Confederacy reacted to their setbacks. Even though they both had a similar invasion and tactical stalemate, a few dared to criticize Bobby Lee, while Bragg, who just commanded his first campaign and did well with the limited resources he had, is lambasted from every corner of the Confederacy. From the lowest private to the president himself, many wish they had capable generals to lead in the Western theater. A Virginian, bluntly commenting on Bragg's failed invasion, wrote, "Oh, that we had another Lee and Jackson to send out there." Almost a month after campaigning through the North, the soldiers had returned to where they started, with little to show for their efforts. Many of the men believe they had beaten the Federals at Perryville and are shocked at the sudden and dramatic turn of events. During their arduous trek back, they turned their disbelief into rage and directed it at the one man they deemed responsible for their failure, the Army commander himself, General Braxton Bragg. As the Army refits and resupplies in Knoxville, the soldiers enter a new kind of war, a war not fought with bullets, but with words. Sides are drawn and allegiances are made. The Army unruly divides itself into two camps, one that supports Bragg and the other that wants to see Bragg removed. The anti-Bragg camp, especially the officer corps, talks to anybody willing to lend an ear concerning their denunciation of the Army chief. The internal civil war that rages in the Army of Mississippi forces the president himself to get involved before the Army is torn apart from within. After receiving a mountain of disgruntled letters demanding the immediate removal of Bragg from command, a concerned President Jefferson Davis decides to call him to travel to Richmond. On October 25, 1862, the general meets with Davis, and many in the anti-Bragg camp believe he will finally be removed from command. But after their private session that lasted over 6 hours, in which the general explained all his decisions during the prior campaign, Davis ultimately decides to keep the North Carolinian. In spite of the popular demand to have Bragg removed, Davis has his reasons to sustain him. First, compared to the late Albert Sidney Johnston, Bragg decided that saving his army was more important than risking it in a battle against an overwhelming foe. Second, many of Bragg's detractors doubled as enemies of Davis's administration. Those who are willing to go against Bragg are also willing to go against him. And finally, the third reason. If Bragg is removed, who will replace him? Neither Generals P.G.T. Beauregard nor Joseph E. Johnston are acceptable replacements. Thus, for the time being, regardless of the ranting and raving, Bragg remains the best man for the job. Once his meeting with Bragg comes to an end, Davis calls on each of his immediate subordinates, Major Generals Edmund Kirby Smith, Leonidas Polk, and William J. Hardee, to each meet with him as well. Here, Davis tries his best to assuage their grievances and implores them to work with Bragg to ensure the Confederacy's survival. In the hopes that they would comply, the president bestows each one the rank of lieutenant general. With that, Davis hopes that Bragg and his lieutenants will be able to find a common enemy in the Union. At the end of October, with his position safe, Bragg reorganizes his force for the next campaign. In the aftermath of the failed Heartland invasion, the Army of Mississippi is in a fragile state, as only 27,250 men are accounted for at the end of the month, with almost 42% marked absent due to sickness or desertion. Even with the conscription law in full effect, not a single draftee has arrived to join the ranks. Realizing that the mammoth Army of the Ohio will soon be marching south, Bragg leaps into action to swell his ranks to meet Buell's eventual invasion. Those who are not sick are called upon to return. Kentucky immigrants are enrolled, and draftees are diverted to bolster the army. By the time December arrives, Bragg's hard work rebuilding his force will pay dividends as the army rolls swell with new recruits. In total, Bragg will be able to fill 49,500 effectives, greatly reducing the disparity between the two armies. At the same time, Bragg shuffles his units around. To help rebuild the morale of the army, Bragg officially renames his force the Army of Tennessee, in part to inaugurate his command, but also to symbolize his commitment to defend the volunteer state. With the passage of the corps system in Congress, the Army commander redesignates his wings as corps. Despite holding Polk in contempt for his multiple shortcomings in the previous campaign, the bishop is given command of the 17,000-strong 1st Corps. Hardee, who continues to live up to his nickname of Old Reliable, is given command of the 13,000-strong 2nd Corps. Smith, who has his 13,500-strong East Tennessee Army attached to Bragg's force, is redesignated as the 3rd Corps. Finally, Brigadier General Joseph Fighting Joe Wheeler is selected to lead the 6,500-strong cavalry arm. With his force ready, Bragg starts eyeing up his next target. Ever since his initial planning for his drive into Kentucky, Bragg has contemplated ways to evict the Federals from Nashville. Now, thanks to his maneuvering into Kentucky the previous month, Buell remains docile in the Bluegrass State. Buell's absence leaves the heavily fortified state capital isolated and open to a siege, while Bragg, desperate to find enough supplies to feed his army before winter, and anxious to leave Smith's jurisdiction, decides on his next course of action. On November 6, Bragg orders his army into Middle Tennessee. Starting at Knoxville, the Army of Tennessee travels southwest via the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad. Once they reach Chattanooga, they board trains on the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad that bring them northwest to Murfreesboro on November 16th. Here, 35 miles southeast of Nashville, Bragg unloads his forces and sets up his defensive line. Murfreesboro, the former state capital, a major agricultural center and rail town of 4,000 people, is named after Revolutionary War hero and major landowner Colonel Hardee Murphy. Despite its rather drab appearance, the town offers little in terms of defense. With Stones River running along the western side of the city, it will bisect any defensive line facing Nashville. Many question why Bragg did not anchor his army on the highly defensible Duck River Valley. They are, however, unaware of the political sensibilities that Bragg is under, that no more Tennessee ground shall be yielded to the invading Yankees. Meanwhile, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, the Army of the Ohio is in similar dire straits. Following the Confederate invasions into the north, many in the Old Northwest started to see their support for the war wane. At the same time, the so-called Copperheads, the peace wing of the Democratic Party, appears to be gaining strength. To further exacerbate problems, President Abraham Lincoln's preliminary Emancipation Proclamation alarmed many Democrats and even some Republicans. One soldier in Buell's army, D.K. Newhouse of the 101st Ohio, expressing the sentiment in the army, angrily said, "I did not come here to fight for Negroes, but I am afraid I am. Negro is all the cry here. Some of the old regiments say they never thought of such thing as laying down arms before now. They say things has got to change soon. They won't fight for Negroes and guard rebel property too." With the midterms less than a month away, Lincoln has a cause for concern. At the same time, Lincoln is dumbfounded at the lack of initiative shown by the Army of the Ohio's commander, Major General Don Carlos Buell. Just like his counterpart in the East, Buell has shown no initiative in marching against the rebels following the stalemate at Perryville. When the president urged a rapid pursuit, Buell demurred, stating that the terrain of East Tennessee is rough and difficult. Incensed, Lincoln asked his general, "Why can't we march as the enemy marches, live as he lives, and fight as he fights, unless we admit there is some inherent defect in our generals and soldiers?" As news spread of the Butcher's Bill at Perryville, various statesmen from the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio joined together in a chorus of disapproval of Buell and called for his immediate removal. The Indiana governor, Oliver P. Morton, went so far to say that Buell is utterly unfit for command of the great army under him. He is slow, opposed to emancipation, and had a bad influence in every way. Unbeknownst to many in the Old Northwest, Lincoln had already tried to remove Buell once before, a month earlier, but Buell's impending confrontation with Bragg in northern Kentucky postponed any change of command until events simmered down. Now, with Kentucky cleared of the rebels and with emotions reaching a boiling point, Lincoln and Halleck have restarted their search for their next candidate. The obvious choice for Lincoln was his previous one, the 46-year-old Louisville Virginian, Major General George H. Thomas. Though on the quiet side and sometimes downright mysterious, Thomas nonetheless proved himself so far in the war, even winning the Battle of Mill Springs back in January, the first significant victory for the Union. The men under him love him, even bestowing him the nickname of Old Pap. Yet, unlike the soldiers, the newspapers despise him, who constantly dog him about his slowness. The Chicago Tribune went so far to say that he was a slower man than Buell. It takes Thomas half an hour to say no. Despite the admiration, Thomas's earlier decision to decline the position weighed heavily against him. Thus, Lincoln decides to go with another candidate, an outsider to the Army. Instead of Thomas, Lincoln taps the victor of Iuka and 2nd Corinth, Major General William S. Rosecrans. On October 26, Old Rosy assumes command of the Army of the Ohio, and the men take an immediate liking to him. Unlike their former commander, Rosecrans makes himself highly visible to his men, instilling pride and cohesion back into a demoralized force. Winfield Scott Miller, writing to his parents, said, "Old Rosy looks like he has not sympathy for the sesh and is greatly beloved by all the boys in the Army. Yet, his honeymoon will be short-lived as many in the Army soon realize who their new commander really is." Many soldiers started to see their general as egotistical and impulsive. General Palmer, who disliked Rosecrans, said, "Another weakness of his is the facility in which he listens to flattery and sycophant. Anybody may acquire his favor by telling him he is a great man." While Thomas, shocked by the turn of events, threatened insubordination if the situation called for it. Regardless of all these negative opinions, the administration hopes that this war Democrat will listen to directives. However, as time passes, they'll soon realize that Old Rosy has a mind of his own. Upon his selection as Army commander, Halleck instructed Rosecrans to follow Bragg into East Tennessee. Desiring to liberate the pro-Union region and sever the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad that linked the Eastern Confederacy with its western states. But, as reports come in announcing a large-scale movement into Middle Tennessee by Bragg, Rosecrans' attention shifts from the eastern half to defending Nashville from a probable Confederate assault. Once again, thwarting both Lincoln's and Halleck's attempts to get their commanders to follow directives. Along with his ascension to Army command, Rosecrans is given the authority over the newly created Department of the Cumberland, which ranges from the Tennessee River to the Appalachians, while Rosecrans' army will be renamed as the 14th Corps. Despite the redesignation, Rosecrans will refer to his force as the Army of the Cumberland. To further streamline his command, Rosecrans redesignates the former corps as wings. The 14,200-strong left wing is given to the Kentuckian Major General Thomas L. Crittenden. Brigadier General Charles C. Gilbert, who commanded a corps at Perryville, is replaced by Thomas, who's given command of the 13,200-strong center wing. Major General Alexander M. McCook, who almost lost his own corps at Perryville, commands the 16,000-strong right wing. The cavalry corps will fall to Brigadier General David S. Stanley, whom Rosecrans personally requested upon his ascension. In total, the Army of the Cumberland will field 43,400 men, with another 40,000 men being held behind due to sickness and guard details. Though Rosecrans can do little concerning his choice of wing commanders, he is able to choose his chief of staff, which he selects Cuban-born Colonel Julius Gareshay. Not only does Gareshay thrive in his position, he also harmonizes well with his commander, in a huge part thanks to the shared Catholic faith. Confiding in his wife, Gareshay writes, "I get along most smoothly with Rosecrans. He's at most but little in advance of me and his abolitionist views." Yet, there's an aura of doom that surrounds Gareshay. While he was in Washington, an old woman prophesied that he would be killed in his first battle. Ever since that prophetic declaration, Gareshay worried about his fate. As Rosecrans establishes his command over the Army of the Cumberland, he also begins planning his first steps against the rebels. By November 4th, it is clear that Bragg is making a concerted drive to fill the vacuum that is Middle Tennessee. To ensure that no threat comes to Nashville, Rosecrans orders his army south. 9 days later, the entire Army of the Cumberland arrives in the environs of the Tennessee capital to thwart a rumored Confederate attack, which turns out to be nothing more than roving rebel bands. With no immediate threat, Rosecrans takes his time and accumulates supplies to prepare for his advance against Bragg, much to Halleck's consternation. On the 17th, Rosecrans finally relates his plan to the General-in-Chief, which he intends to lull the Confederates into thinking that he will remain passive at Nashville. Once they let down their guard, he will rush out and crush them. However, regardless of how well his plan is working, Lincoln and Halleck desire a timely offensive that will keep the rebels on their toes, warning that the longer Rosecrans dallies at Nashville, the stronger Bragg becomes. Nonetheless, Rosecrans believes his plan will work and confides to his wife. The next battle in this department is likely to decide the war. There must be no failure. I will not move until I am ready. For the rest of November, Rosecrans slowly gathers supplies for his eventual march south, letting both the Confederates and his own men enjoy relative peace and quiet after a hectic year of fighting. Yet, every day Rosecrans let pass without a forward movement, the more perturbed the Lincoln administration becomes. Some begin to seriously consider that maybe Rosecrans was not the best candidate for the position after all. As November gives way to December, Middle Tennessee remains relatively quiet. Just as things seem peaceful, a well-known figure arrives in the Confederate camp to ruffle feathers. This figure is General Joseph E. Johnston, the newly appointed theater commander, sent by Davis to quell the infighting and to solve the growing crisis in the western states. Yet, the authority Johnston is given only allows him to command any force he is present with between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River. Holmes' department, across that mighty river, is out of his jurisdiction, which will complicate his plans to defend Vicksburg. Nevertheless, Johnston assures Davis he will do his best. While the Confederates celebrate Johnston's assignment, Bragg sees a chance to disrupt Rosecrans' lines of communication. On December 5th, Bragg dispatches Colonel John Hunt Morgan north to cause chaos. After a few days of traveling, Morgan discreetly moves his force across the Cumberland River during a snowstorm and surprises the Hartsville garrison on December 7th. Without much of a fight, Morgan captures the entire garrison, around 2,100 men. Once the raid is complete, Morgan returns to the Confederate Army for another hero's welcome. One Tennessean wrote, "This is a joyous night in camp. Every mouth is full of hosannas to the heroic Morgan." Wanting to ensure his officers will work together, Davis decides to tour the western states and galvanize the soldiers. On December 12th, Davis arrives in Bragg's camp to rousing cheers. For the next few days, Davis reviews the troops, dines with officers, and hands out well-deserved promotions. However, the biggest reason for Davis's visit is to procure desperately needed reinforcements for the threatened Vicksburg garrison. Unable to convince Holmes to cooperate, Davis ultimately decides to draw troops from the single front that seems to be quiet, Middle Tennessee. With Rosecrans appearing to be docile, Davis orders Bragg to send Stevenson's 8,800-man division via rail to relieve Pemberton's hard-pressed departments. Along with Stevenson's infantry, Force's 2,500-man troop is sent to annoy Grant in West Tennessee. These deductions will shrink Bragg's force from 49,500 men to 38,850 men. The drawing of these troops will not only unknowingly remove Bragg's numerical advantage, but will also put him at a 5,000-man disadvantage if the two forces ever come to blows. Despite the shrinking of Bragg's forces, Rosecrans remains equally docile in early December as pressure for an advance builds against him. On December 5th, Halleck, annoyed with Rosecrans' apparent lack of urgency, writes, "The President is very impatient at your long stay in Nashville. The favorable season for our campaign will soon be over. Twice have I been asked to designate someone else to command your army. If you remain 1 week more in Nashville, I cannot prevent your removal." Incensed at the threat, Rosecrans fires back that night. "If my superiors have lost confidence in me, they had better at once put someone in my place and let the future test the propriety of the change. To the threats of removal and the like, I must be permitted to say that I am insensible." Regardless of how Washington is feeling, Rosecrans will bide his time in Nashville and only move out when his stockpile of supplies reaches an acceptable quantity. To add more bad news for Rosecrans, reports start filtering in about the bloodbath that was the Battle of Fredericksburg. Burnside, just like Rosecrans, has been pushed into an early winter campaign against Lee's rebels in Virginia. Yet, after trying to break through stout rebel entrenchments along the Rappahannock, the Federals are slaughtered in their attempt, suffering roughly 13,000 casualties. Appalled at Burnside's lopsided defeat, the entire country turns to Rosecrans to be the bringer of good news as the end of 1862 nears. Robert H. Cabwell, writing to his father, puts it bluntly enough: "We have received the news of the repulse of Burnside at Fredericksburg, and I am now confident if Rosecrans do not move forward and gain a victory at Murfreesboro, the cry of foreign intervention will be again the cry." Along with Burnside's defeat, Rosecrans is forced to divert 2 divisions from Thomas's center to guard Gallatin, Tennessee, while keeping an additional 30,000 men in Kentucky under Wright to guard various railroads and bridges. Both of these forces are kept away from the front by Morgan's audacious troopers, who are once again rampaging throughout eastern Kentucky. Just like Forrest in West Tennessee, these rebel horsemen are effectively limiting the number of men the Federal Army commander can use in his upcoming offensive operations. Regardless of the war, both sides try their best to celebrate the holiday season. On Christmas Eve, the 1st Louisiana and 2nd Kentucky sponsor an officers' ball at the Rutherford Courthouse. Captured Union flags and decorations cover the courthouse as officers and their guests make their way indoors. Yet, just as the ball is about to kick off at midnight, a false report of the Federal advance abruptly ends the party. Christmas Day proves to be equally dismal. With no planned drills, soldiers and officers alike stagger around the camp drunk. Repulsed by the scene of debauchery, Captain Tom Spence of the 2nd Arkansas Mounted Rifles writes about his experience: "I assure you we have a very poor set of field officers. To tell the truth, we have no commanders." While the men went crazy in camp, Hardy visits his 13-year-old son Willie, who's currently a student at the Military Academy in Marietta, Georgia. The misery is not exclusive to the Confederates, as the Federals experience a rather dull Christmas as well. For the most part, no major celebrations are planned, and the men mainly wander around camp. A soldier in the 36th Illinois wrote about his uneventful holiday: "This is Christmas Day and Santa Claus has not come, unless he visited the little ones at home. Would give a great deal to be at home today." Regardless of how little the soldiers did on Christmas Day, Rosecrans and his lieutenants meet at his headquarters to discuss how they would take on the last few days of 1862. Just like the former head of the army, Rosecrans has gained the ire of Washington for his reluctance to move. Yet, by the evening of Christmas, Rosecrans is running out of excuses to advance against the rebel army, whether he desires to campaign in the winter or not. As more reports come in from the front, it is all too clear that Bragg's army has shrunk. Combine this with the adequate amount of supplies that have been accumulated in Nashville, Rosecrans realizes he has no good reason not to move. With his forces not prepared to move out on Christmas Day, Rosecrans postpones his advance till the 26th. Rosecrans plans for his wings to advance along 3 different routes. Crittenden's left wing, following the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, will march directly upon the rebels. Thomas's center, following Crittenden's right, will march down Nolensville Turnpike to threaten Bragg's left flank. McCook's right wing will first march upon Franklin, then pivot east to follow in the wake of Thomas. If all goes to plan, wherever Bragg decides to defend, Rosecrans' columns will easily outflank his defensive line. As the officers mill about the headquarters after receiving their marching orders, Rosecrans comes to his senses in the dim candlelight. Realizing it is time for his army to conquer or die, he slams his fist on Garrichet's desk and announces to the room, "We move tomorrow, gentlemen. We shall begin the skirmish, probably as soon as we pass their outpost. Press them hard, drive them out of their nest, make them fight or run, strike hard and fast, give them no rest, fight them, fight, I say." Upon hearing Rosecrans' animated declaration, the officers respond with a rousing cheer. Thomas, not much of a talker, gives an approving grin. Thus, on December 26, the Army of the Cumberland will march from its camp and strike out against Bragg's Army of Tennessee in the waning days of 1862.